Chapter 1. The Great Lexscape. The emptiness of space was interrupted by a small craft, a communication satellite, buzzing about its business, blankly following its preordained route, silently completing its mission to settle into coordinates in a geostationary Earth orbit, its tiny shadow falling imperceptibly on a tiny section of southern England. Red, blue and green lights fluctuated on its surface. It flew by like a vacuum-enforced mute light show as it beeped on its journey round the Earth like a giant spinning R2-D2. On closer inspection, you could make out the OVBOS logo emblazoned on its side. Soon it would link up with its sister satellites in their ever-tightening celestial necklace around the planet, and the OVBOS Corporation would be in total control of the Earth's communications. This was the final piece of the OVBOS satellite network, finally waltzing into its final destination, jigsawing into the literal web in which the planet had been caught. All went silent. The voiceover silenced. The TV picture went black. The remote had been switched to off. Lexus Adams tensely held the TV remote in her left hand. She stood motionless, cocking her long black hair to one side. Was she imagining things? Did she hear something? A trickle of broken glass being crunched underfoot on the ground underneath her window. No. Was she being paranoid, she thought to herself. Just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to bust your butt. Better be paranoid than dead, she resolved to herself. Even if no one can get near the house without tripping an electronic wire connected to an alarm, never take things for granted. She chanced a timid glance out of the window and let out a heavy sigh of relief. A pigeon was tapping its spindly little feet doing a Michael Flatley impression on the broken crockery she had deliberately scattered as a warning device. Lexus was a secret resident in a converted barn on her friend's farm. She chose to be here as it was far from humanity as possible. In the wilds of Dorset, surrounded by trees and marshland, backing up to a lake and a quarry. She was really deserted out here. Her friends were on holiday, off skiing in Chamonix in France. She was invited to join, but skiing wasn't really her thing. It was too much like fun. Her friends knew she shrugged it off as politeness. Happy as a pig in muck to be left on her own with a few cows as neighbours, living like a hermit with just her Dell XPS 13 for company suited her. She was never one for socialising and often wanted to just disappear. The room was dark and gloomy. Curtains half-heartedly covered the two windows, and the room was purposely dimly lit. She turned to her computer on the table, knocking over a vinegar bottle in her haste. She spun the laptop round so it was not facing the window. Hurriedly closing the windows as quick as she could, she paused on the last tab, staring thoughtfully. It said, OVBOS, Defence Contract, Classified Weapons. She pursed her lips as she considered the sensitive information she'd read on the page and how potentially disturbing its content was. The OVBOS Corporation was releasing a great new product that evening, something to revolutionize communication tech forever. They claimed. The internet beamed directly into your head, using devices similar to contact lenses as screens. It sounded like a really bad idea, dangerous even. She didn't trust OVBOS as far as she could throw her laptop. She twitched in panic. A strange vocal impulse that sounded like a cross between Mr. Bean and Chewbacca came out of her pharynx. Together with a shiver down her spine, it felt like someone had walked over a grave. That last statement was too ominous to dwell on. With a flick of the wrist, she X'd it off. Clicking on CCTV surveillance mode, she flicked through the various camera images looking for trouble. Lexus, Lexi to her mates, is a computer hacker, well versed at security and keeping herself off the grid. She had black matted dreadlock hair, blue lipstick, and wears blue rouge makeup on her cheeks. Wears black clothes but insists she's not a goth. At 19 years old, she has had to learn to fend for herself and become a virtuoso in her chosen field of life skills. But it is her incredible skills as a hacker that have brought her to the attention of the great and the unsavoury, and sometimes the great unsavoury. Many times has she evaded so-called secret military establishments after hacking into their systems and leaving coded messages to the tune of, "Your security is rubbish, improve it." A wake-up call for those army chiefs with hackable weapons of mass destruction. Friends insisted she was obsessed, but Lexi claimed it was probably down to her condition. According to her class tutor, she blamed too much on her condition. She was diagnosed with Aspergers when she was 9, a keen learner in subjects she was interested in. All other subjects were inferior and not worth bothering about in her eyes. So she obsessed on computers. Knew more than the teachers and was not afraid to let them know it. She became so lippy that one angry teacher said, "If you're so clever, you take the class." Bad move. He made her take the class and immediately regretted it. The Asperger's condition often makes kids oblivious to when they're showing off and can be frustrating to others. As her computer skills became super proficient, she soon became a hacker, whilst having the incredible focus that requires. So Aspergic and a hacker, what a combination. Lexi had a saying, "You don't have to be Aspergic to become a hacker, but it helps." She froze. On the screen in front of her was a figure, wearing black and green combats, carrying a gun. With a click, she zoomed in. He was about 300 metres away on the outer perimeter of the farm. The soldier was wearing the uniform of the Vibos Private Army. Nathan Strom, the head of the Vibos, had his own personal guard, and they were jokingly referred to as Stormtroopers, and one was heading with recognisable stealth towards her on foot. He would not be alone. These Stormtroopers worked in packs like wolves, but without the compassion. They were recruited via dubious means, former gun runners, hired mercenaries, or just hitmen for hire. Not nice people. This is why being paranoid was a compulsory way of life. She zoomed in on the gun. It was a ZAT 500, an experimental prototype she had just been reading about. Armour-piercing bullets that can penetrate walls, bullets that can explode like grenades on impact, with infrared sights to boot, and if the dark web was to be believed, an energy pulse rifle. Just a bit sci-fi. And he was probably looking at her right now. "Time to get lively, Lex," she vocalised a loud voice to herself to shock her system into getting her backside into gear. She began to breathe heavily, hyperventilating, almost asphyxiating. "Stick to the plan and stop panicking," again aloud to herself. She could feel the adrenaline pumping. She gathered up the laptop and several printout papers and roughly stuffed them into her backpack. Then she ran upstairs into the bathroom. In the bath was a life-size inflatable doll, submerged in a tub full of warm water, like the ones used on raucous hen nights. The blow nozzle was opened and the inflatable was full of lukewarm water. Lexi pulled the gruesome gargoyle out from its watery grave, replaced the nozzle, and then ran to the bedroom. The plastic doll was unceremoniously dumped in her bed, and a duvet was flung over it. "Be a good girl, Doris," she whispered. Doris, the doll, was the right size and shape, and now the correct temperature to make the perfect decoy for even the most sophisticated infrared tech. She opened a minibar fridge next to the bed and unfolded a cold grey jumpsuit that had been residing in there. "Hardly edible," she smiled. It was a thermal insulating cloth that had been cut and stitched together to make a heat-proof onesie. She quickly pulled it over her black attire. It was a homemade infrared-proof suit, stitched together, complete with hoodie. She lay on the bed as she struggled to shoehorn her hips in. Yelling could now be heard outside. Guttural male voices out machoing each other, barking orders. She finally won the battle with the onesie and pulled it over her head. The window smashed beside her. A bullet tore through the wall, kicking up debris on impact. Her heart went into overdrive, adrenaline flowing. A second crash came with a canister oozing smoke. Time I wasn't here, she thought. She grabbed her backpack and ran to the stairs, barely pausing to step. Outside, an infrared scope failed to register a descent of the stairs. Instead, it focused on the bedroom upstairs. Her improvised fashion show had achieved the desired invisibility. The infrared signature showed up on the advancing soldier's view scope. He could see an orangey-red female shape lying in the bed. Doris was doing her job impeccably. He looked over his shoulder. His hand made a forward gesture, and several other shadowy figures joined in the hunt from their hidden positions. Lexi's plan was working. They were focused on the doll. She didn't have time to congratulate herself on her ingenuity as she raced through the kitchen, reached into her backpack and tossed a canister oozing a pink gas as she ran past the CD player on the table. She stopped, took a pace back, and pushed play. Iron Maiden boomed into ear-busting existence. She twisted up the volume to loud and then ran. The front door exploded. Gas canisters came spinning through the air, pink smoke billowing around as the can spiraled in its flight. "Did you throw that gas grenade or did I?" she muttered as she ran. "Run to the hills," Iron Maiden blast appropriately as she threw herself down the steps into the cellar. She deftly hurdled a wine rack as she moved to the back of the room, barely any time to take in her surroundings as she ducked into a pantry. Soldiers noisily burst through, shouting incoherently in the confusion that followed. They all trained their sights, desperately looking for a way through the pink-hued gas vapours. Guns primed, laser beams danced through the smoke, music screamed in the air. You'd be forgiven if you believed you'd just walked into a nightclub. Commander Strix strode arrogantly through the smoke. The expression, built like a brick outhouse, was invented to describe him. His green and black khaki uniform could barely contain his massive bulk. If the O2 Arena was a marquee, then he would be the only bloke that could put the tent back in the bag. His complexion was a rusty brown colour that made you wonder whether it was tan or just years of permanently ingrained dirt. He had an inscrutable pair of pale blue eyes, underlined by his diamond-encrusted teeth, sporting a pattern of something inappropriate in Russian. He was a Russian mercenary with a questionable violent past. Nothing fazed him, although a certain sound seemed to be currently jangling on his nerves. "What's that noise?" yelled the commanding officer in his Slavic accent. "Iron Maiden," came the reply from one of his underlings. "I know that, Private. Get rid of it. It's doing my nut in." "No time to care. Oh, I've a red contact upstairs," shouted one of the men in a gruff, menacing London accent. They all ran upstairs, stopping at each intersection to ensure it was clear to go. Professionally trained men, but not friendly. The shoot first, don't bother to ask questions later mob. The first assassin rounded the corner, swung his rifle and shouted, "Freeze!" The irony of that command, given Doris's predicament. No answer from the lump in the bed. "You have 3 seconds to answer, hacker scum." These soldiers were ruthless, efficient, but not known for their articulate conversation.